South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is looking like the bigger dog in his ongoing diplomatic beef with US President Donald Trump. Ramaphosa, aka Cupcake, issued some riddled shots at the White House, which the White House responded because a hit dog will holler by saying Ramaphosa is running his mouth. That's all they could come up with. I'll break all of this down for you in a bit. My name is Tony. I'm a Ghanaian writer who lives in the US. On this channel, I talk about geopolitics from the perspective of an African. So, if that's something you are into, subscribe to this channel. So this Sunday, November 22nd, the G20 Leaders Summit would start in South Africa. It will be the first G20 Summit happening on the continent of Africa. And ahead of the summit, Ramaphosa, aka Cupcake, I like to call him Cupcake because it's just fun. Cupcake spoke at the G20 Social Summit today, Thursday. What's today's date? Thursday, 20th, 2025. The thing is, the G20 Social Summit this is the second time it's happening. Brazil, when they were holding the presidency of the G20, organized the Social Summit for the first time. And the goal was that, well, at G20, world leaders get together to discuss the fate of the world without participation from the people the world leaders are talking about. So they thought that it was a great idea to have, ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit, the G20 Social Summit, so that social groups of various kinds from around the world will come together to have a conversation about their thoughts on the future of the world, right? And the thoughts they express in this social summit would find their way into the decks or the conference by the world leaders. And so the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, closed out the G20 social today. And I'll start with an observation I've made, and then we move to his beef with Trump. This is the first G20 happening on the continent of Africa. South Africa is the first African country to host the G20 Leaders Summit. And the US have been doing all it can to shine negative light on the G20 Summit. I said the US and not President Trump because last week, CNN, a TV station which is supposed to be anti-Trump, ran an interview with Elon Musk, the father of Elon Musk, knowing damn well that Elon was going to say the racist things he said about South Africa in that interview. If CNN wanted to interview a South African ahead of the G20 summit, and they were serious about interviewing a serious South African who would have important things to say about South Africa without even being a political leader, they could have spoken to Trevor Noah, who have appeared on CNN countless number of times, Tyler, even though she's not a political person, or even Talis Theron. Talis Theron is, or Theron. What's the right pronunciation of her name? Talis Theron. Talis Theron is the first African to win an Oscar, and she's South African. And not just that, she does humanitarian and socio-political work with the United Nations. So she has enough experience and knowledge to speak to whichever political issue CNN would have wanted her to speak to. But CNN decided to go with Elon Musk because I believe, this is just my theory, that the CNN is in alignment with Donald Trump when it comes to shining negative light on South Africa ahead of the G20. And again, this is informed by history. CNN was the same TV station that ran a story about Ghana in 2016, saying that there was a famine in Ghana and people were queuing for food in 2016. This was after the elections in Ghana. Ghana had had a very successful, peaceful election. CNN had nothing negative to say about Ghana, so they decided to make up a story about Ghana. When the last time Ghana had something close to a hunger was in the 1970s, when we had a drought and bushfires, something that happened in the US as well. At the time there was famine in Ghana, there was famine in the US. Google it. There were a lot of farmers in the US who committed suicide because of how bad the situation was in the 1970s leading to the 1980s. There was a global drought in the world. So when CNN ran in 2016 that Ghana was having a famine, they were spewing lies. And so I believe that CNN on all Western media cannot be trusted when it comes to how they speak on Africa. Anyway, let's move on. So let me give you a day-to-day breakdown on the situation between Trump and Ramaphosa, and then I will tell you the shade he threw. I want to get it accurately with the dates and everything, so I wrote something down. Anyway, so on April 12, 2025, President Trump publicly threatened to boycott the G20 over white genocide in South Africa. Fact check, there is no white genocide in South Africa. And then between June and July 2025, the White House officially confirmed that it was not attending the G20 Summit in South Africa. And again, they said because South Africa was engaging in some anti-American rhetoric. And in August 2025, the US tried to pressure South Africa to not release a joint declaration at the G20 Summit. So the joint declaration is like the conclusion of the matter. So the G20 Summit is a club of a sort. So usually when they have the meeting, the leaders together will release a joint declaration to tell the world what they declared or what they came to agreement on. And because the G20 works on a consensus basis, all the leaders in the world, even if they have disagreement, have to agree to the declaration before it comes out. And so the US said because it was not going to participate in the G20 summit, South Africa cannot put out the joint declaration because they don't have consensus. First, again, this is the first G20 meeting happening in Africa. South Africa not putting out a joint declaration is a negative light on South Africa. Why on South Africa? South Africa holds the presidency of the G20. It's an annual thing, right? South Africa holds it this year. Last year, Brazil held it. Next year, the US will hold it, right? And so South Africa not putting out a declaration would be a failure of their presidency. So the US wanted to force South Africa to fail. And the president of South Africa came out and said, we cannot be bullied. We are going to go ahead to do everything as is traditionally done in relation to the G20, including putting out our declaration. First blow to the Trump administration. He did that in September. Direct quote, we will not be bullied. The G20 process is moving forward without the United States. So South Africa said, we don't care what the US does or say. We are going to do our job. And so in October, right, Republican politicians in the US issued a statement accusing South Africa of anti-white racism, again, unfounded. And so as part of this, the US said it was going to send only limited number of participants to the G20 summit. Usually, the G20 summit, countries will send representatives, and the US said the US president is not going to be there. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is not going to be there. The Vice President is not going to be there, but we are going to send some people, right? And then on November 15th, this is where it gets interesting. Now, it was on November 8th. President Trump announced a full boycott of G20. President Trump said because of anti-white racism in South Africa, the US is boycotting G20. Full boycott. He used the expression full boycott because they said, quote, "We are not legitimizing a government that promotes genocide." So at this point, it has been concluded that the US is not going to participate in the G20, right? Good. And so on 15th, the US announced that even more stronger than 8, that it will boycott all G20 negotiations, sections, and leaders meetings. You know, there's a lot of backdoor meetings in these G20 meetings. And the US said, even those small backdoor meetings, we will not participate in them. And yesterday, when the G20 Social Summit was ongoing, the president of South Africa said they had received a notice from the president of the US that they may attend the G20 in one form or another, which means that they are prepared to participate. But he also added that even though the US may be attending the G20, most of the discussions and processes are too far advanced for the US to participate. The US have decided to join the G20 at the 11th hour. The G20 cannot go back to things they've already done, which means that the US realized that the G20 was going ahead and making decisions without the US. So the US decided to now participate because they don't want to be left out. And then now they want to be included. And the South African president said, well, you can be included, but we are not going to go back on decisions we've already taken. Because usually, think about it, the G20 meeting is a 2-day thing, right? But the decisions that get made in those 2 days, usually the process will start for months, sometimes years. So by the time the leaders of the world meet in the room, all the issues they may have been trashed out. So usually the meeting in South Africa is usually just a ceremonial meeting. And so if the G20 have already taken a decision, I'm pretty sure the US know that they've taken a decision and we don't like this decision. We want to be involved in changing part of it. But too late. That's what South Africa said. So because South Africa told the US that it's too late for the US to join the G20 process. Remember, President Trump boycotted the G20 somewhere in July. So from July, the G20 have been having backdoor meetings ahead of the November 22nd. Now, 2 days to the meeting, Trump is saying that we want to come to the meeting. And South Africa is saying that you can come to this meeting, but just know that we've already agreed on some things. This is the 11th hour. And so the US said, actually, we didn't say we're coming to the meeting. We only said the acting US ambassador to South Africa will be attending the ending of the meeting as part of the ceremony to hand over the presidency. This is like me telling a girl that I like her, I want to go out with her, and she's saying, oh, I have a boyfriend, and me saying, just kidding. I wasn't just kidding. I was just trying to take my rejection with no iota of integrity by lying. That's what the US is doing. The US, because South Africa shut them down, is trying to look like, yeah, I'm onboarded. You are boarded. And so this takes us back to the shade Ramaphosa threw at the US at the G20 social. So, with the exception of the US President Donald Trump, when world leaders are shading each other, they do it in a way that if you know, you know. So, Cupcake, the president of South Africa, when he spoke before the G20 social, started by talking about Bandung. Bandung is a city in Indonesia. And what is Bandung? In 1955, there was a summit that happened in Bandung called the Asia-Africa Summit. And at that summit, Asian and African countries, aka the Global South, because there are some countries from Europe that participated in Yugoslavia, the Global South decided that they were going to be non-aligned. They were not going to take side in the US and USSR Cold War. So at this point, the US and the Soviet Union were trying to lobby the newly independent countries in Africa and Asia to take their side. The US wanted the African and Asian countries to join NATO. Soviet Union wanted them to join the Warsaw Pact, and the African and Asian countries, including Ghana, the reason I'm saying including Ghana is this happened in 1955. Ghana wasn't yet independent, but we were at the point we're 2 years away from being independent. So the president of Ghana attended this meeting as an observer. He was the prime minister of Ghana at this point, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. And so they decided that we're not going to take the side of either the US or the Soviet Union. And that is the meeting that led to what became known as the non-aligned movement in 1961. So the Global South political position as we do not care about the US or the USSR. We love and are cool with everybody as long as we have shared interests. That political position was decided in Bandung, Indonesia. So when the South African president Ramaphosa invoked the Asia-Africa Summit of 1955, what he was doing was telling the US president that, bro, we and you are not cool like that. We are cool, but not really. We are not committed to you. You and I are in a situationship. That is basically what non-aligned movement is. Non-aligned movement is situationship. This is just a joke. So if you are dating a Nigerian guy or any African or Asian guy, just know that their country's political position is they are not committed to anybody. I'm joking. I'm a Ghanaian guy. I love commitment. Anyway, so the situationship between the Global South and the US is dependent on the fact that the US would do right by the Global South and the Global South would do right by the US. So whenever the US and the Global South are not aligned on an issue, they are not supposed to. So basically the shade he was throwing at Trump is that we are not cool like that. We are in a situationship. You can't tell us what to do. If you want us to do something for you, you come and ask us politely. You try to court us. You try to flirt with us. You try to, be a nice guy. If you stay outside and try to throw your weight around like you have some authority over us, you don't. Basically, that is what Cupcake said to Trump. But he didn't say it in these words. He said it by just saying that in 1955, we had the Asian African Summit and blah, 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 blah. I am because we are. He said it in the diplomatic language. I'm breaking it down for you, what he said, right? And so I believe that the Trump administration got the message. That is why Caroline Leavitt Well, how does he pronounce the name? I'm not very good with name pronunciation. Caroline Leavitt went on Twitter and said Ramaphosa is running his mouth. The US is not, interested in blah 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 with South Africa. Basically, shade thrown, shade received. End of story. As it stands now, personally, I am a big fan of Cupcake. Anytime he speaks on the global stage, he's a funny guy. His speeches have always been entertaining for me to read, for me to listen. And I like how he's very South African when he speaks. And so this is another case of Cupcake dominating the world stage, making Donald Trump realize that we don't answer to you. We'll answer to the people of South Africa. And he even said that in a speech, that the leaders of South Africa are governed by the people of South Africa. And I respect Cupcake for that. I love how he handled this whole situation with Donald Trump. Of course, it's a developing story. It will be ongoing. But so far, Cupcake 1, Trump 0. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel if you are interested in geopolitics from the perspective of an African who like to have fun with these issues. I would post another video about Nelson Mandela because the world will be paying attention to South Africa, and also anything interesting that will happen in the G20, I'll report on it. And talk to you later.